Hi, this is Adam Rao from chessengland.com. Just going to spend an hour or so talking about games played at my events at chessengland.com. And just so you know, this weekend is a tournament at Hampstead, a weekend tournament, 5 games of chess, 3 on Saturday, 2 on Sunday. And as usual, you can enter if you go to chessengland.com and follow the link to Hampstead, or you can just Google Hampstead Chess. And I'm very pleased to say that on both days at lunchtime, we are going to have some special guests. So on the Saturday, if any of you have used a piece of software called chessable.com, you'll know that it's incredibly useful for learning openings. And one of the things I've decided to do going forward is I'm going to try and learn a new opening, and I'm going to be using Chessable to try and learn that opening. On the left of your screen, you can see special offer, chess calculation training Roman Edouard. There will be a special offer for that product going out in my email this evening. I usually send a mail shot out, and you'll be getting that. If you're on my mailing list, you'll be getting that this evening. On the Sunday, we've got Gideon Segev from decodechess.com. So Saturday, we've got David Crammerly coming along to talk at lunchtime about chessable.com. And Sunday, we've got Gideon Segev coming along to talk about decodechess.com. Both pieces of software designed to improve your chess. And there'll be special offers going out on my email this evening. So if you're not already on my email and you'd like to take advantage of the special offers, then go to chessengland.com and there is a sign up page right at the top. There's a little link to a sign up. And if you click on that and you just fill in the form, you just have to put in your email address basically, you will go on my mailing list. And I have 3,000 people on my mailing list. I send out a mail shot. Usually I send it out on Monday evening, but this week I've delayed it a little. Might do it tomorrow evening because I was doing this stream. But you will get a special offer in your email inbox. If you can make it to Hampstead and you're not playing, but you'd like to come and meet David Crammerly from chessable.com, you can come on the Saturday about lunchtime. And if you're coming on the Sunday, you can meet Gideon from decodechess.com. And these guys are basically promoting learning tools for club players. It's up to you to try them. So for instance, chessable.com, it has a lot of very interesting, opening books and middle game books and increasingly end game books. And they're doing a special offer for this book you can see on the left of your screen, Chess Calculation Training, which is really cool. And Gideon from Decode Chess is doing a special offer for his website, which basically takes your games and analyzes them in natural language. And it's very hard to explain what it does. It just does that. And you've got to go onto decodechess.com and open up a free account and just try it. And if you're there at Hampstead this weekend, come along and he will demonstrate it for you. Okay, so in a moment we are going to let's have a look. We are going to have a look at some games, and I'll be back in a few moments with those games from you. You have sent me games, and I will make a brave attempt to play through some of them for you on screen. Right at the moment, you can see my calendar of events. I mean, this is what I do. About 2100. I'm about 175 ECF. Not a very strong player, but I'm a pretty good player. But my speciality is organising chess events. So if you've played in Golders Green or Hampstead or Muswell Hill or any one of a number of events, you probably met me, and hopefully you enjoyed the tournaments. And if you go to chessengland.com, on the right hand side you can find my calendar with all the information of events. Hampstead coming up this weekend, obviously, and next weekend, next week, the week after, the 15th of August, which is a Wednesday, we've got Muswell Hill weekday FIDE Rapid Chess, which is a tournament which takes place during the week, and we get about 30 to 40 players coming along on a Wednesday in this case, more often than not Tuesdays, and playing FIDE rated rapid chess in an excellent pub called the Clissold Arms in Muswell Hill, which is northwest London. Come along and meet us. Okay, in a few moments we'll be right back with your games. If you're interested in having your game analysed live on Twitch, send it to me at adamralph@gmail.com. Otherwise, we'll be right back in a couple of moments with some games. Leave a comment in the chat and we'll be right back in 2 minutes. Okay. Back in the room. Now, tell me that you can hear me, and we're almost ready to go. We'll have a look at a few games. Interestingly enough, when people send me games, they don't always send me the whole game, but they do send me fragments, which are quite interesting. So I had somebody send me a couple of openings that they played at Golders Green last month. We've just had a Golders Green this weekend. We had a pretty strong tournament, and last month one of the players sent me a couple of games he played in the Open against really strong players who basically, how can I put this, stuffed up in the opening, and he failed to take advantage of it. So I thought I'd just show you the openings to these games. Okay, in this game, Bill Linton from Mushrooms Chess Club is playing white, and black is a player called Radovanovic, who is really strong, just below kind of master level, and frankly, he's pretty good. And you wouldn't expect him to make mistakes. But in this game, Bill played his normal open Sicilian, got to it in a roundabout way, just delayed playing d4 for a few moves just to see where black would put his pieces. Would he put his knight on f6 early? Would he play e6 early? That's quite a clever tactic to use if you want to play the open Sicilian, but you don't know what variation your opponent is going to play. You can delay playing d4 for a few moves, and it's not going to kill anyone because black can't really stop you. So he played a delayed d4 and got the opening he was interested in, open Sicilian. And then it transformed into a fairly mainline sort of rouser. It's called a Richter rouser kind of variation with bishop g5, which is very aggressive. Rather than playing it to e3, he put it on g5. It's a pretty normal developing move. Putting pressure on black's position. He's threatening to take the knight and maybe double the pawns, but mainly he's expecting black to play e7 to e6 or even e7 to e5, whereupon white will be pinning that knight to the queen on d8, and black plays e6. Why does he walk into that pin? Mainly he walks into that pin because he's going to play bishop e7, breaking the pin, but he's also played e7 to e6 to keep white's pieces out of these important squares, d5 and e5. This is the center of the board. This is where all the action takes place, and he's just keeping white's pieces out of these important squares. He could have played e5, but then d5 starts to look like a huge hole in the position. Do you agree? White just continues his development. Now this is interesting. He plays bishop e2, not bishop to c4. Might be slightly out of place there. He plays bishop e2, and he's just going to play either a quick castle kingside, or he's going to play queen d2 and castle queenside. And black doesn't know which just yet, so he continues to complete his development. a6. Not sure he needed to play a6 in this position. He could have just played bishop e7 and just got on with casting. But I think in this position he wants to see what white is doing with his king. Is he going to go to the king side, or is he going to go castle queen side? It could make a huge difference to black. So white plays queen d2, and now he's keeping his options completely open. I mean, this is still in the opening. Black does not know where white's king is going to go, whereas white knows that black's king is probably going to end up on g8. Question is he going to castle queenside as white and chuck all his pieces at the king, or is he going to play more positionally and castle kingside and just put his rooks on good squares and develop a little bit more slowly? Black doesn't know. So he decides to spend a move kicking that bishop. Now you notice in this position the bishop is defended by the queen, the knight is defended by the queen, this knight is well defended, this bishop is well defended. All white's pieces are harmonious. So black decides to cause a little bit of disharmony in the position by playing h6. And white has, well, he's got a choice. He can either take the knight on f6, giving up the bishop pair, or he can play bishop h4, or he can put his bishop back on e3. I do not think he would play bishop f4, because black can then take on d4 and then play e5, and that would be slightly painful, that fork. So white plays bishop h4. Now the difference in this position is this bishop on h4 is not defended. It's just sitting on h4, and spend a couple of minutes just thinking about what you would play in this position. And let's see if you played the same move. Let's have a look. What would you play? Well, he played knight takes e4. And this looks logical because the queen is about to take the bishop on h4 and the knight is about to take the queen on d2, and it looks like an exchange of pieces will follow. White took on d8 and black took on d2, but white, the weaker player, played knight takes c6, and in this position black suddenly realized that when he takes back on c6, which he has to, can't take on d8 because the knight protects it, white can then play bishop anywhere, let's say bishop a5, let's say bishop back to h4 actually, and suddenly white has trapped the black knight. And basically he's going to remain a piece up in this position. Now, white is a very good player, good 2000 rating, that kind of player, Bill Linton, and black is a 2280 kind of player, FM strength, and a very strong player. This is a rapid play game, so there is that, but this often happens in the opening. Black has basically played what he thought was a crafty little move to win a pawn, knight takes e4 in this position, and has ended up after knight e4, bishop takes d8, knight takes d2, knight takes c6. He has ended up a whole piece down straight out of the opening. 11 moves in, and you'd think that there's no way back from this, but this is a rapid play game played last month at Golders Green, and I can tell you that white won the piece but somehow managed to lose the game. And Bill won't mind me saying that. And he was as surprised as anyone, but it just shows you can fight back even from a position such as that if you've got the inclination. I mean, there was a game recently in the Dragon where Gawain Jones, who is a very strong grandmaster in his own right, was playing Magnus Carlsen and managed to win a piece. Carlsen just dropped a piece in the Dragon in a very simple position and still managed to beat Gawain Jones a piece down. So he gave him a piece odds, basically, and still managed to win. So you shouldn't give up if something like this happens to you, this kind of disaster. Do not give up. And Bill actually had a second game. Let's see if I can find that game. Go right back to the beginning. And let's see if I can find that game. He had a second game where he was doing really well against a player called Federico Rocco, and it went something like e4 c5, another open Sicilian, knight f3 d6, very straightforward open Sicilian, d4 takes, knight takes d4, knight f6, knight c3. This is normal open Sicilian theory. You may have seen this before. Bishop g5, e6. Okay, so we've got a very similar setup to the previous opening. And white played f4. And I think, trying to remember what happened in the game, I think the idea of this sort of position is white in some positions is planning to play e5. I think e5 is not threatened at the moment, but he's thinking about e5. This is a logical plan in the long run. So black plays h6 in this position to kick that bishop away, and White played bishop h4. All looks very normal. No, he didn't play bishop h4. Now I remember. He played bishop takes f6, giving up the dark square bishop. Queen takes f6. Now black has a bishop pair, which should be quite good for him. These dark squares can become quite weak. If black can just find a way to put some pressure on the dark squares in this position, especially if he can manage to bring his bishop to this diagonal, the a7 to g1 diagonal, white doesn't have a dark squared bishop to fight against that. And white played, let's have a look, bishop c4 in this position, which is an amazing oversight. Completely forgetting the fact, I mean, these players are both very strong players. Federico's playing black, he's well over 200 now. Completely missing the fact that he can just take on f4, which, you know, wouldn't be vulnerable in most games because you wouldn't have taken on f6. Your bishop would still be here, your knight would still be here. The queen would not be in a position to take on f4. But in this position, the dark squares, the dark side is definitely calling, and he should have taken on f4. But this is sometimes what happens in chess, not just rapid plays. I've seen it in slow games, which is you playing on autopilot and you just kind of play stereotypical moves. Here's one. Black played knight c6 question mark. So instead of taking on f4, he just played knight c6, and white is now faced with capture on d4 by either the knight or the queen, so he has to do something. It takes on c6. Black has to take it back, and now white played castles. Now his f4 pawn is defended by the rook. So both players missed that opportunity. It's black's move. And he played what looks like a logical move. He played d5. The only problem with this move is it's a great idea. Bring the bishop to c5 with check, put it on that lovely diagonal, but it gives white the opportunity to open up the position. And as you may have noticed, white has castled. White has got most of his pieces developed. He only needs to move his queen and everything is connected and ready to go. And black hasn't castled and still has to develop any other piece. He's just got his queen developed on f6, if you can call it a development. So d5 is a nice idea, but he really needs to complete his development first. E takes d5. And I think when Bill sent this game to me, he said, try putting this game through your favorite engine and just see how much both players missed. Right here, E takes d5, C takes d5, but E takes d5 opens up the E file. That may not be the best idea. C takes d5. And white played the enterprising and pretty decent sacrifice bishop takes d5. I have no idea what the engine would think of that, but I like the way he's thinking. And after E takes d5, which is pretty forced, white played rook e1 check. And the king is kind of caught in the center of the board. He played bishop e6, and white had the lovely knight takes d5. The bishop on e6 is pinned, and he can't really do much about the knight on d5. He's just got to move his queen. Where are you going to move your queen? He moved it to g6, whereupon white went knight c7 check, and the king had no choice but to move to e7, and white took on a8. I think there might have been a bishop c5 check in here somewhere from memory, because this looks dreadful. I'm sure there was a bishop c5 check in here somewhere with king h1, but I think you get the point. This is not what black planned as the stronger player. Bishop takes d5. I feel certain it was bishop c5 check, king h1 takes on d5, rook e1 check, bishop e6, knight takes d5, queen g6, knight check, and then king e7. I think it was knight takes a8, and then maybe rook d8 with queen f3 defending the knight on a8. Now it was just pretty dreadful for black, who was the stronger player by about 10 ECF grading points. And that's a typical rapid play game. You come to Golders Green or any other rapid play tournament, and you will see, if you're like me and you spend a lot of time watching other people play, you will see a lot of games like that. Games that are not perfect, should you put them on your favorite engine, and yet they're quite entertaining. We're going to have a look at another game in a second. Leave me a message in the chat. I will be back in 2 minutes. See you in 2. Okay, so we're back with game analysis. I'm going to look at a game here by also from Golders Green, Daniel Young, who is a strong player, about 160, 170 player, 1900 in kind of FIDE terms, and he played a couple of games at Golders Green last month, July, which he was very kind enough to send me. And the first game was played against a FIDE master from Hendon Chess Club called John Richardson, and slightly different from the other two games. We've got kind of mainline Queen's Gambit theory. Let's have a look at the game. John Richardson is playing white and Daniel is playing black. Just to put you in the picture, John is about 210. He is an international master in everything but title because he scored enough points many years ago to achieve the IM title, but never received the IM title because he never made the rating that he needed, and I think he missed it by points, just a few points. So he's a really strong player. Playing d4, d5, Daniel Young is playing black, and what we get is a Slav defense, very solid defense. The idea being that the bishop can come to f5. If you play e6, you spend quite a long time trying to get that bishop on c8 into the game. So d4, d5, c4, c6, mainline Slav. White plays knight f3, and black plays knight f6. And you're probably thinking, if you're looking at this position, why doesn't black just take the pawn on c4? Well, it's called a gambit, Queen's Gambit, but it's not a true gambit. And quite often what happens if you take on c4, yes, you can hang on to that pawn if you like. You can play moves like bishop e6 and b5, but you're going to spend so much time hanging on to that pawn. White is going to develop all his pieces and a strong initiative. You have to be very careful not to spend too much time in the opening hanging on to meaningless material. Here is a good tip. The opening and the ending are a bit like takeoff and landing in a plane. Takeoff and landing in a plane, I don't particularly worry about air travel, but it's literally the truth that takeoff and landing are the most dangerous phases of any air journey. And in chess, the equivalent is the opening phase, say the first 10 to 15 moves, where things can go tragically wrong very quickly. And right at the other end of the game, the end game, where things can go equally spectacularly wrong very quickly. And I can probably give you plenty of examples of openings where people have just gone astray. We've just had a look at a couple of examples from the Sicilian, which just went pear-shaped. But equally, there are many endgames between very strong players. So you could have players who are grandmaster strength, where they play blunders in simple king and pawn endings, rook and pawn endings, minor piece endings with bishop against knight. There's so many different mistakes you can make in the ending. And if you follow chess live using an app like followchess.com, you can watch multiple Grandmaster games from tournaments like the London Chess Classic and Vacanze. And as you're following the games, you can see the analysis on the screen, and you will see plenty of mistakes in the endgame from strong players. Not normally from the opening, because they will know their theory incredibly well. But it is possible for players below master level to go spectacularly wrong in the opening phase and the endgame. Middle games, they're generally very strong tactically and positionally, and they're not going to make too many mistakes. So in the opening, golden rule is usually don't chase pawns. Let's see what happens in this game. White's just played knight f3. We haven't got very far in the opening, and I'm already giving you a lecture. Let's just play a few more moves. Knight f6. White plays knight c3, still not defending that pawn. Black plays e6, and white just develops his bishop to a nice aggressive square on g5. And at this point, black decides to take on c4. Is he hoping to hold on to that pawn? Or is he simply doing that in order to be able to open lines for his pieces? We shall see. Let's see what happens in this position. D takes c4, white plays e4. Not worrying too much about getting that pawn back immediately. He's playing a developing move with e4, incidentally threatening to take on c4, but more importantly threatening to push his pawn to e5. This is pinned, this knight. Things can get a little bit hairy in these positions. After e4, black played b5, and in this position, not only is he hanging on to that pawn, he's also threatening to push on with this pawn, b5 to b4, kicking the knight away, and doesn't have any obvious squares, maybe a4, but that looks a bit loose. Knight on the rim is dim, as they say. b5, and white plays e5. Now this is theory. I'm pretty certain this is theory. Black has to play something like h6, which he does, kicking the bishop. So if white plays takes knight on f6, black plays h takes g5, and we get a wild position known to theory. White ignores that and plays bishop d2. And Daniel said something in his notes to this game that white's choice of bishop d2 was played just to get a playable game. He's not interested in discussing opening theory, and he knows that if he plays the wilder variations, there is a wild variation with bishop h4, g5, knight takes g5, which is really crazy. And black, instead of taking on g5, he goes, I think knight, something like knight d5, I believe, something like that. It's definitely knight takes g5, and it gets completely crazy. Now, John just played bishop d2, h6, bishop d2, and he just wants to get into a playable position, especially in a rapid game. This game was played at the time control of 25 minutes each, plus 5 seconds a move for the whole game. So it's quite fast. And at that time control, unless you can remember all the theory, you don't really want to be defending a completely wild position against a weaker player. You want to get into a playable position where you can outplay your opponent positionally. Just avoid preparation and develop your pieces. So bishop d2 is a good idea. And black plays the logical knight d5, and white plays g3. So this is quite a useful diagonal for him. Putting a bishop on g2 is called a fianchetto, and he's doing this because he wants to basically soften up this long diagonal, develop his bishop, castle kingside, put his king into safety, but use this diagonal, or possibly use this square e4 for his knight or for his bishop when he's attacking the black king. He knows, for instance, that the black king's destination is going to be g8, it's going to castle kingside. He would be suicidal to go the other way, so he's definitely not going to go castles queenside. So g3 makes sense. He could have just played bishop e2 and castled, but where's that bishop going? It's not pointing in any useful direction. So bishop g2 is quite an interesting idea. Black played bishop e7, he's going to castle, bishop g2, and then both sides do the sensible thing and put their king into safety. And black plays bishop b7. defending the c6 pawn, which defends the b5 pawn, but also he's just eyeing up that diagonal so he can play c5 maybe at some point and have the bishop ready on the diagonal to challenge White's bishop on g2. So bishop b7, White plays knight e4. White is basically trying to bring his pieces closer to Black's king so that he can launch some kind of attack. The knight on e4 is beautifully centralized. It covers d6 and c5, threatens to jump into f6 in some positions, and it's just a really good square for the knight. So knight e4 is a really good move, just in case Black decided to exchange it off, which he wouldn't, I believe, because the knight on d5 is fairly good too. This is a lovely square. So the battle of these knights is about to begin. Which one is in the best position for the middle game? Knight d7 just basically develops another piece and possibly bringing it to b6, defending the constellation of pawns over the queen side. If we got to an endgame, just as a general observation, Black's position would be excellent. If he could swap queens off, I think he'd be in a fantastic position to win an endgame, because he has this 4 pawns against 2 majority on the queen side. So White doesn't want to swap off too many pieces. His preponderance of pieces is on the king side, so he's looking to start an attack on the king side. And after bishop b7, knight e4, knight d7, he played queen c1. That's a cheeky move, isn't it? What's he threatening? He's got his eye on the king side, and as a general rule, if you're going to start an attack, you've got to have 3 pieces, basically 3 pieces ready to launch at your opponent's king. And he's got, let's have a look, the knight on e4 ready to jump in, bishop on d2, queen on c1, forming this battery, the queen and bishop battery, and maybe he's thinking about sacrificing on h6, bringing his queen to h6, and then maybe bringing the other knight to g5 in some positions and mate on h7. That's quite nasty. So queen c1, a move on his first rank, a really subtle move, but with a poisonous motive. Queen c1. And Daniel plays a very sensible prophylactic move, king h7, defending the pawn on h6. But the problem with this move is you're now putting your king on a vulnerable diagonal, and White plays queen c2 immediately, threatening to discover check against the black king. So the queen on c2 threatens the black king. If the knight moves, it's discovered check. And what could he play in this position? What would you play if you were White in this position and it was your move? So queen c2 has a really horrible threat, which is to play knight f6 check, which is a double check, a double discovered check. Knight f6, discovering the check against the black king with the queen on c2, and also checking on f6 with the knight. And unfortunately, Black has no choice but to move the king. After knight f6 check, king moves, queen h7 is mate, checkmate. So that's a really horrible threat. And Black has no choice but to respond to it with king g8. So he's come to h7, and then he's gone back to g8. So White has basically won a move by playing queen c1 and then queen c2. He's just won a free move to put his queen on c2, and that's still his move. So he puts this rook on d1, rook a d1. A nice sensible move, defending the pawn on d4. Why did he move the rook on a1 to d1? I don't know. Mysterious rook moves. He could have played rook f to d1, but that rook might have more of a role on the king side. So he's going to play, probably going to leave his rook there and maybe play f4 in some positions. Who knows? But that rook was doing nothing on a1. He's probably thinking about defending this pawn when he moves this bishop. Rook on d1. Good square. And he knows that if black is going to get any counterplay in this position, he is going to have to play something like c5, whereupon this rook is perfectly placed opposite the black queen. And I think in this position, black actually played c5. So we got 15, move 15, c5. He's not afraid of a challenge. Is Daniel. So he played c5. And now white played d takes c5. And there's no reason not to. He's opening the d file for his rook as planned. Black recaptured with the knight. And white gave up his lovely knight on e4 by taking on c5. Black played bishop takes c5. So he's given up his lovely knight positioned on e4, but he had a plan in mind, which was to reposition his queen on the king side, where he can do some damage to black's king. So he plays queen e4, and this is quite a good maneuver. In this position, you could say white is thinking about improving the position of his pieces. Generally, once you've developed all your pieces, you look at your pieces and you think, well, which of these pieces is badly placed? Where could I put it where it would cause more problems for my opponent? And queen e4 is a fairly sneaky move, taking advantage of this pin, so he can play queen e4 to g4, where he would be threatening bishop takes h6 already with the pin on g7 and mate on g7. So queen e4, repositioning the queen on a good square. Good move. So queen e4, what happened after queen e4? Black played queen e7 and white went queen g4 as advertised, threatening bishop takes h6. And thinking about it, black doesn't have an awful lot of choice in this position. After queen g4, what would you play? Leave me a message in the chat. What would you play in this position? And let's see if you can find any better moves for black than just king h7. I can't see anything better than king h7, which is what he played. King h7, and I'll give you a few moments to try and work out what white played in this position, because it's logical, but I'm not sure how many people would see it. What would you play? And let's see if the chat box is in the right place. I usually put it in the wrong place. Let's move. Let's not move the whole thing. Let's just move the chat box. And see what you would play. There's nobody in the chat at the moment. So let's put the chat up on the top right hand corner. What would you play in that position? Okay, so white played the surprising but logical move. Bishop g5. And the idea of this move is that white wants to reposition his bishop on an aggressive square, probably f6. And he can do so tactically, because bishop g5, probably he can't take it. He can't take on g5 because I think h takes g5, knight takes g5 check, and then the king is in trouble. If you went to g8, what would you play in that position? I think you could probably play queen h5, and I believe that might be checkmate on h7, or h8 if you run away with the rook to give yourself a bit more room. I think queen h7 check, king f8, queen h8 is mate. Thank you very much. So I don't think, after bishop g5, I don't think you can take on h5. So white has got a free move to bring his bishop to a more aggressive square, possibly even sacrifice it on f6. Who knows? Depends on what black plays. And in this position, black has to move his queen. So he plays queen c7. Why not? And bearing in mind the fact that black can't take on g5, white has a free move to develop pieces. So he played 21 rook f to e1. And who knows where that rook is going. He's protecting e5, which stops black's pieces coming to the king side. It's kind of bulwark of his position, and it cuts his position in two. And in some positions, maybe he might bring the rook into the attack, but basically he wants to defend that pawn on e5 and complete his development. So rook fe1, and I think here black plays knight b4, and I don't think in this position Daniel is after the pawn on a2. That would be a bit too much. He's just basically opening the diagonal for his bishop, and he wants to bring his knight to d3, which looks like a nice square. Knight b4 to d3, nice square, maximizing the power of his knight to attack the rook on e1 and also the pawn on f2. So knight b4 is a good move. What is white going to do in this position? I think in this position he has to do something critical. He has to do something committal, and this is the sort of position where if you get into these sort of positions as white, you have got a moment in chess where you've either got to go forward or you go backwards very quickly. In other words, in this position, white has got to commit himself to an attack, or he runs the risk of black completing his development and just overwhelming him. Don't forget, he's already a pawn down on c4. That's not so important. What is important is that if white doesn't prosecute this attack fully and win with the attack, if black successfully defends and exchanges off queens, it's just going to be a hopeless endgame for him. So he's got to go forward, not back. And in this sort of position, you can't falter. You've just got to get on with it. So in this position, white threw everything into the attack with, let's have a look, bishop takes h6, which is a nasty looking move. Bishop takes h6. And I don't believe he can play king takes h6. That just looks suicidal. Because white can play, let's have a think. So I think we can play just the same sequence of moves. There might even be a more simple sequence of moves, but if you took with a king, what would you be able to play? You could just play queen g5 check, king h7, queen h5 check, king g8, knight g5, and mate on h7. But there might be something more catastrophic. So king takes h6, queen h4 check, and then king g6. The king is kind of trapped. But can we mate him? Well, if you can see a mate there, you can let me know. That's what we're here for. But black played g takes h6, which looks altogether more sensible. And white played, well, again, have a think. You've just chucked in a piece and you're trying to open up black's king. What would you play in this position? You can't afford to really go backwards. You've got to be able to expose black's king. So the move he played was knight g5 check. Very brave move. Knight g5 check. And it's possible that he could have taken, I mean, either way, I think the same thing happens. If he takes, you go queen h5 check, queen takes g5 check, and you've got perpetual backwards and forwards if you want it. But there are other horrible moves in that sequence. I mean, just off the top of my head, if you take it, and this isn't what happened in the game, but queen h5 check forces the king to the g file, then you take on g5 check, and then you've got possibilities. For instance, you can't really go king h7 because you can play bishop e4 check, and then if you move, queen h6 check, king g8, queen h7 is mate, and after bishop e4 check, the only other move is bishop takes e4, and rook takes e4 brings that rook to a beautiful square where you're threatening rook h4 mate. You can't do anything about that either. And the other move you could play after king h7 is you could just be cheeky and just play rook e4. And if he takes it, you've got the same idea with bishop e4 check. King is definitely a goner. So he's not going to play after knight g5 check. He's not going to play along and take on g5. So he played, leading to similar ideas. He played king h8, forcing white to be creative in this position. And then what happened in this position, I believe it is white's 24th move. King h8. Just checking on the move order. Bishop takes h6, g takes h6, knight g5 check, king h8. And white plays. What would you play in this position? I think the most obvious move is queen h5. And how does he defend queen h5? Interesting position. King h8. King h8, yeah. Well, I'm looking at this position, I'm thinking, well, white's got queen h5. I think in this position what he played was he first exchanged on b7. And I'm not sure that makes a difference, but let's have a look at it. Bishop takes b7, and black played queen takes b7. And then white played our move. Oh, I see that the move is he played on bishop takes b7 in order to get rid of that bishop so that he can bring his rook to e4. That's a good move. So queen h5, and now he's threatening queen takes h6 check and then queen h7 mate. His attack is still going, and you have to admire him. He's thrown a couple of pieces at black's position, and he's still threatening mate. He hasn't run out of pieces to attack black's king. So black has got a really concrete threat to deal with. queen h5, he really has to play king g7 to defend this pawn. I don't see another sensible move. And now we've given away what White's plan is in this position. So you get 1 point if you find the next move. Just 1 point. But we have mentioned it. Now I understand why he took on b7 first. Very good. And John is a very strong attacking player, so I'm not really surprised. But now he uses e4 as a pivot point to bring his rook into the game. Excellent. So black still can't take on g5 because we just go, oh, check. King goes to the h file, rook h4, checkmate, white wins. So rook e4, just bringing the rook to a sensible square. On the fourth rank, he can bring his rook to f4, g4, h4, and threaten mate in all sorts of different ways. And notice how he has done that. He brought the rook to e1, overprotecting e5. We thought, well, what's the future of that rook? Can't go to e4 because that bishop on b7 covers e4 beautifully. Now we see. Nifty. Somebody just messaged me and said, put the engine on. I'm not going to put the engine on because what I'm trying to do is understand the game, analyze it in my head, trying not to use the engine to find the best move. And that is the only way to improve your chess. If you want to improve your games, you have to do what Daniel has done. Daniel Young in this position playing black. He lost this game. He wrote it down. He looked at this game afterwards and tried to find an improvement to his play. But the first thing you must do is look at the game without an engine and try and work out where you went wrong yourself. Write it down, which Daniel did, and then see a stronger player, probably somebody stronger than me in Daniel's case, because he's won 6-5. He should be asking someone like John Richardson, who also does coaching, but see a stronger player or put it on an engine, or as we've mentioned, decodechess.com might be something you could use to analyze the game, see where you went wrong. There must have been a better alternative for black earlier, because this position, just on gut feeling, is dead for black. He has 3 pieces fighting to checkmate him, all in this quarter of the board. I mean, the rest of the board doesn't matter. I mean, if it was an endgame, black would win. Lovely pass pawn coming on the queen side. It's not going to get to an ending because in this quarter of the board, white has an overwhelming attacking force, and black has got to try and find a way to defend this position. So what you're going to do, you're playing black. You're playing black and you've got to find a way to defend this position. Again, just to remind you, this is a rapid play game, 25 minutes each plus 5 seconds a move. And I'll bet at this point, both players didn't have a lot of time. And playing these sort of positions with very little time on your clock is really tough. White's playing exactly the right kind of game against his opponent at these time controls. Put your opponent under pressure, develop your pieces, attack the king. If you're given the choice of being a pawn down but attacking your opponent's king, or being a pawn up and having to defend, your inclination is usually to be the attacking player. But some players are very good at defensive play. But in most cases, we all like to be the player attacking the opponent's king. The prize is greater. So let's see how black defended this position. I can't see many sensible moves. I can only see a few candidate moves, as we say, moves that black has to play in order to avoid disaster. Makes it easier for him to try and find moves. He went rook f to d8. And rook f to d8 is a good move. Off the top of my head, literally, he's exchanging pieces. He wants to give his king an escape square on f8, maybe e7 to run away. So rook f to d8 looks good. What did white play next? So it's your move. You've got to find the best move for white. And he played, I mean, he's got to watch out for rook takes d1 check, which isn't so much the exchanging of rooks, which is the issue, but if he allows black to play rook takes d1 check, you've got to take it back with the queen, and the queen is perfectly placed on h5, and you do not want to spend several moves recapturing the rook on d1 and then bringing it back to h5. So the only logical answer, so as not to lose time in your attack, is what move? Not to move the rook on d1, but to take on d8. And you don't lose time. In chess, you're talking about the unit of time, which is a tempo. Every move is a tempo. Every time you lose a move, you lose a tempo. You give your opponent time to develop or to defend his position or to bring another piece into the attack. So it's important not to lose time in chess. And white plays rook takes d8. Black has to take on d8. And white's position is now critical. He has got pieces, 3 pieces against the opponent's bare king, but he's reached a critical position. Critical position number 2, I would say. I'd say the first one was after bishop. He had to play bishop takes h6 earlier. And in this position, he has really got to find a way to get a black king without losing time. What would you play? I suspect you would find the move because you need to do something that forces black to respond. You can't play a quiet move. You can't move the knight because the rook on e4 is hanging. And you can't play maybe rook g4, which looks fairly good, but it gives black another move to run away with his king. So by process of elimination, you've got to play a nice forcing move like, well, a capture or a check. Very forcing moves. Checks are the most forcing moves. Capture's second most forcing move. If you can play a check, which is also a capture, knight takes e6 check, you're obliging black, because of this fork on the king and the rook, which is undefended on d8, you're obliging black to play f takes e6. So knight takes e6 check is a lovely move. Forking the king and rook, he's got to take it back. And white has earned himself a free move to bring this rook into play on g4. And you could analyze that position, and you should, but generally that looks like it should be mate in a few moves because you've got the rook and the queen coming in, and this pawn controls any escape via f6. Rook g4 check should be mate in a few moves. I know white is running out of pieces, as Daniel says in his notes, but he's got the key pieces still on the board. The 2 heavy pieces, the queen and the rook, the Russians call these their heavy pieces, and they do a lot of the heavy lifting work in this position. Rook g4 check. King went back to f8. I think it's fairly easy to see that. What else can he do? king h7, queen g6 definitely, king h8, and then he goes queen h6 check, and the queen has to come to h7, whereupon you play, the king can't move anywhere, queen f6 check, not really after the rook, but the queen has to defend on g7, and you go queen takes g7 checkmate. Lovely. So after rook g4 check, what does black do? He has to run away king f8, and so you'll move white to play and win. What would you play? Queen takes h6 check. King can run, but it can't hide. King goes to, well, if he goes to e7, you could always play queen g7 check or rook g7 check. And if you wanted, you could win the queen, but you're not after that. You're after a bigger prize. So king e7, something like, you can do it in several ways, but rook g7 check will do. King can't come out. Why can he not come out? I love it. The pawn on e5 is playing a role in the attack by preventing the king escaping. That little pawn that we defended, which cut the black position in half, plays a role in this attack. And wherever black goes, I think he's going to get mated. He can't go king f8 because of queen h8, which is mate. So he's got to go king e8. And we are getting so close to mate here. What would you do in this position? Must be a mate in this position. Queen takes e6 check looks fairly good, but there must be an even more killer. Oh, hello, that's a good move. Hold on. Queen h8 check forces the bishop back, and then you go queen h5 check. And you notice what you've done by that is taking away this square for the king. So he's sandwiched on the back rank by his own pieces. He's trapped, can't come out because of the rook, and can only play one move to defend along that diagonal, which is queen f7, which is humbling. Then queen f7 is mate. Checkmate, white wins. Phew, that's really cruel. So in that position, queen takes h6 check. He went king e8. Instead of playing king e7, and white went queen takes e6 check. And he resigned because king f8, white plays rook g8 mate. Lovely. And if he goes something to e7, anything to e7, rook g8 is also mate, because he can't now defend by blocking that check on f8 with any piece. And just to prove a point, after queen takes e6 check, queen e7 is also mate with rook g8 for the same reason. So John Richardson won with a fantastic attack, and I only got that attack, that wonderful game, because Daniel Young, the loser of this game, sent it to me by email. And I would like more players to send me games by email, and I'll see what I can do to analyze the games live on Twitch. In 2 minutes, we are going to have a look at another one of Daniel's games. As he says, suitably inspired, he went back to the drawing board the next round and he duffed up one of his opponents in a great game, and we'll have a look at that in 2 minutes. We'll be right back. If you're enjoying it so far, leave me a comment in the chat. We will be right back. Okay, so we're going to have another game from Golders Green. If you're interested in taking part in one of these events, well, the next Golders Green event is actually on the 15th of September. It's just off that calendar. If you look on chessengland.com, it's on the 15th of September. We were going to have it on the 8th, but we moved it to make way for a fine event, which is the British Blitz Chess Championships on the 8th of September. So I'll put that on my calendar, and it'll be taking place, the qualifying event is going to be taking place on the 8th of September at Holland Park in London, and there are qualifiers taking place all over the country on that same date. And if you're interested in Blitz Chess, 3 minutes plus 2 seconds to move Blitz Chess, which I know many of you are, you should rush to enter that event. It's being run by myself and Kishan Patney, Brainstorm Chess. There'll be a link on Chess England's calendar. And if you're interested in Blitz Chess, you can't miss it. It'll give you the chance to qualify for a final later in the year with good prize money. There's good prize money available at this event at Holland Park. Some of you have played there before, you probably know about it. There are some live videos from Holland Park Blitz on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Adam Ralph. And we look forward to seeing you there. But on the 15th of September, we're back at Golders Green. And we have about 150 players, usually over 5 sections. But in September, we are going to introduce an extra section. And I'm going to put more details in my newsletter. And like I said earlier, if you haven't already signed up to my newsletter and you're watching this video, just go to chessengland.com. Right at the top, you have a link to join, to sign up, to subscribe to my newsletter, and it's completely opt-in and opt-out. I always joke that I'm just going to send you lots of junk mail about tournaments, but effectively that's what you're signing up for. Lots of information about tournaments, not just in Northwest London, but around the UK, sometimes abroad, depending on what I'm involved in. And if you want to find out about the latest developments, what's the freebies that we're giving away at Hampstead next weekend, the discounts we've got on software, what's going on in the chess world, just sign up for my newsletter and I'll try and make it as entertaining as possible. Not just a whole list of things that I'd like you to play in, but that will be one of the things you're signing up for. So let's have a look at another game from Golders Green. We're looking at again at Daniel Young. Very kindly sent me a couple of games. Here he's on the white side in a later round, and he's, like I said, about 165, 170 ECF, probably about 1900 FIDE, and he's playing a young player called Ethan Sennett, who's very talented. His rating has gone up, his ECF has gone up, but he's not the favourite in this game. You know, he's graded about 20, 25 points below Daniel, and I reckon that gives White the edge. Having the white pieces is useful, and being higher rated. So White was looking forward to doing well in this game, and he says, suitably inspired, he played the following line against Black's French defence. And the French defence is one of my favourite openings. It's very solid. And this is the Winoa. Winoa variation is very complicated. White basically accepts these rather crummy double pawns and this isolated pawn on the queen side in order to get the bishop pair and quick development and an attack on Black's king. And like the previous game, he's using these pawns to split Black's position in half, and his natural area of influence, White, is on the king side and Black is looking on the queen side for counterplay. Now I like it because I'm not going to castle king side and give my opponent a target. I'm going to attack these weak pawns. But let's see how Ethan Sennett defended this position. Knight e7, good move. Queen g4, and black in this position has several alternatives. And I will say right up front, this is not the sort of position you should play with black unless you've looked at some theory. Okay, because if you castle kingside in this position, it is doable, but there's a whole load of theory where white gets a very strong attack against black's king, and if you don't know the theory, you ain't going to survive very long. And this is a rapid play game. You aren't going to remember the theory. Even Garry Kasparov probably couldn't remember all the theory in this line in a rapid game. So queen c7 is a sensible, interesting, sensible move. Oh, look, he's left this pawn on freeze. It's called a poison pawn variation for a reason. If white takes that pawn, black plays c takes d4 in this variation. His rook is defended by the knight, and now he's coming in on the queen side. The whole queen side falls apart, and this is playable, very playable for white, but you've got to know the theory. And if you're not up with the theory, don't play into this line in a rapid play game, especially when your opponent is probably prepared for it. So both sides are avoiding super critical theory, and white plays bishop d3. Now I don't know the theory of that line, but if I was black, and I often am on this side, on the black side of this position, I would be quite happy to see white play bishop d3. I would think bishop d3 is probably not a great move. Off the top of my head, not knowing the theory, I could be inclined to play c4 here and just kick the bishop away again, and then play knight f5 to defend g7. And am I doing well? But black played takes on d4, which looks good. And I often say it looks good optically, because from the looks of it, white is going to have a hard time defending this pawn on c3. If he recaptures on d4 with the pawn, unfortunately black has got queen c3 check, picking up the rook on a1. So he can't do that. And if he took back with the queen, which is ugly, now he's left with these split isolated pawns. Knight c6 just wins the pawn on e5. Queen is on it, the knight is on it. So he can't do that. He's got something else in mind. He plays knight e2, which is quite a common theme against the winner variation. White is looking to develop all his pieces quickly, so he's not so worried about pawns. He'd like to hang on to this pawn, but he's prepared to give it up in order to get his bishop to f4 and develop his pieces quickly. And he's not so worried about the pawn on c3 as long as black is forced to take it with his pawn, which takes away this square for his queen, and white can just crack on and develop pieces. Maybe he'll even take on g7. So knight e2, normal move, and black's not having any of that. He just wants to develop. Knight bc6, and Daniel says d takes c3 is the normal move in this position. So d takes c3 is theory, and knight bc6 is not so good, because white has the opportunity to play c takes d4. I see. So c takes d4. Let's look at this. The whole position is very solid for white. Central pawn mass. This chain, white's going to play c3. He's got a chain c3, d4, e5 is really solid. Cuts the position in half. White's going to attack the black king. And normally in these sort of positions, black has this tactic. Just ignore the queen. He has knight takes d4 with knight takes d4 to follow and queen c3 check. But now, of course, he doesn't have that tactic. I see. Queen on g4 guards d4 as well. So Black has got a difficult choice. He can't really castle kingside because it looks suicidal, so he played king f8 to defend the g-pawn. But now white has solid centre. He plays a crafty move. What would you play in this position? Just off the top of your bonds. You want to develop your pieces to their most aggressive squares. White plays a4, bringing his bishop to a3, which is a nice diagonal, really lovely diagonal. And black plays knight b4. He has some threats. Maybe knight takes c2, check. Is that really a threat? Don't know, knight b4. Ah, I see, king f8. Maybe I've got the move order wrong. That doesn't look very good. C takes d4, black played bishop d7, that's why. Bishop d7 first, offering white the chance to play queen takes g7, which he declined with castles. Now the reason he declined it was because his pawn on g2 is hanging at the end of it, and black will castle queenside, so he just says no thanks. You've got to make a choice about where you're going. And now in this position, if I were black, I would be looking at castling on the queen side. Why? Why did he not play castling on the queen side? What would you play here? If you're a French player, you're used to having to give up a few pawns in order to finish your development. And really, in this position, if king f8 was the only move, I think black's in trouble. So he plays king f8, and we get that maneuver with a4. What happens after castles? Queen takes g7. We do have some open files against white's king. And I really love the French. But I often get into positions like this where you're basically teetering on the brink of just losing loads of pawns with the prospect of an endgame with h4, h5, h6, h7. Harry, the h-pawn, as the ginger GM Simon Williams would say, Harry is a really powerful pawn in those endgames. It's very difficult to argue. So what would you do as black in this position? I might be tempted to go rook f8, rook df8, and just play rook g8 and just try and develop some initiative. Or can I play rook? Can I just sacrifice 2 pawns? I don't think so. I think actually there's too much going on there. So after bishop d7, king f8, maybe that was forced. Bishop d7 castles, king f8. In which case white has gone wrong in this opening. That's my diagnosis at the moment. Sorry, black has gone wrong in the opening because white has got this fairly unassailable pawn chain. And after a4, Daniel plays a4, he's going to get this lovely diagonal as well. Black has definitely lost his way. He plays knight b4, and white just goes bishop a3. He's not worried about knight takes c2, looks suicidal after any rook c1, winning the knight. Knight b4, what's he going to do? He could play knight takes d3, but the problem with that is c takes d3 just gives white lovely open files to bring his pieces into play, and this is pinned. Oh, he could just play bishop takes e7 in some positions and queen g7 and then queen f6 check. Looks horrible. So instead of taking, he tried to play a5, basically blocking that diagonal. I don't think he's going to keep him out for very long. Queen h4. Neat move. Pressurizing e7. If he takes, queen takes e7 check is the end of that. Queen h4. And black played bishop takes a4. He is... That's basically snatching material. because what else does he have after a5? Queen h4, bishop takes a4 looks desperate. It has the air of desperation, but what else is he going to do? Why, it's not even going to think about worrying about pawns. He's just going to crack on with f4. This is a rather nice attack. I can see why he was inspired by losing the previous game, and he's just going for the same kind of theme. Why worry about the pawns on the queen side when the area that counts is right over here? This area with the queen, the knight can come in, the f-file can open. You've got this bishop on a3 and potentially 3 or 4 pieces coming and pointing at the black king. You're going for mate, not worrying about a few measly pawns. Daniel notes that in that previous position there was probably a quicker way to punish the bishop takes a4. Tactical reason is bishop takes b4, a takes b4, and now this bishop is pinned against the rook on a8, and you can play bishop b5, winning the bishop, winning material. So after bishop takes a4, White had a tactical way of taking advantage of that move based on loose pieces. Loose pieces, this bishop is undefended, this rook is undefended, loose pieces drop off. LPDO, loose pieces drop off, and after bishop takes, pawn takes, bishop b5, something is going. That's clear material advantage. But after bishop takes a4, Daniel is going for the kingside attack, and trust me, it's probably not going to make a lot of difference in the long run, because black does have still has loose pieces. Plays queen d7, I think, in this position, and probably because he realized what was going on here, but also to try and stop f5. And white's not bothered, just carries on, and black plays bishop bishop takes c2, and Daniel, his comment is very funny. Black is consistent, too consistent. Grabs everything that isn't nailed down, but this takes consistency too far. Grabs everything that isn't nailed down is a good way of describing it. But I think bishop takes c2, I mean, I might be tempted to play that as well, because the bishop might come back to defend on the king side, but as Daniel points out, it's too late. It's too late. So I suppose he could have taken on f5, and black missed his chance. White plays in this position. What does he play? Let's have a look. f5, bishop takes c2, and white plays 17, f takes e6. I mean, that looks the most logical. You could take on b4 and take on c2 if he gives you a chance. It's probably, Daniel points out a line with bishop takes b4, bishop takes b4, and then black plays bishop takes d3, and you go f takes e6, attacking the queen on e6. No time to do anything except recapture. Otherwise, rook takes f7 check is complete dynamite. Queen takes e6 check is queen takes e6 is forced, and white goes knight f4, and that looks like toast for black. Okay, there's an awful lot happening to the black position in this line. including white playing e6, just busting the position open. So after f5, bishop takes c2, white did the next logical thing, which is take on f6 immediately, opening the f-file with the same idea in mind, knight f4. And black played queen takes e6 forced, and white just took a move out to play bishop takes c2, knight takes c2. Just note that is pinned on e7, that knight. And white plays knight f4. Tempo on the queen. You've still got the same ideas in this position of e6. Oh, I see the move. Very nice. Can you see white's idea? Queen d7. There are so many nice ideas in this position. It's quite hard to restrict yourself to just one, but I'll let you have a think about that. Probably the last move of the game, really. What can you do in this position, which takes advantage of the pin on e7? That's pinned. This is pinned effectively by this pawn, and this h-pawn is pinned. If you can't take on g6 because of the rook on h8, can't take on g6 with the knight because it's pinned, and can't really take on f6 because that will be pinned. Knight f4 to g6 check is lovely, lovely move. Really lovely move. Well done. Knight g6 check showers the board with gold coins, as they say. Knight g6 check. How many pins are there in this position? Blimey. h7 is pinned. f7 is pinned. e7 knight is pinned. And the knight checks the king and forks the rook. Really, this should have been, if there's any justice in chess, knight g6 check should have been the last move of the game. But of course it wasn't. Black played king e8, and we played on for a couple more moves. White played knight takes h8, and black played knight takes a1, so he looks like he has some hope. But in this position, white played rook takes f7. The point being, the knight on e7 is still pinned, but now pinned against the queen, and white wins the knight on e7. And in the process, probably checkmates black. I don't really see any decent moves for black in that position. Well done, Daniel Young. So those games were excellent, excellent games. And thank you ever so much. I hope you see this video. Thank you ever so much for sending them. I'm going to put this video on YouTube and hopefully you find it vaguely entertaining. If you do, have a look at the Chess England calendar on chessengland.com and have a think about either playing in some events that I organise and sending me some games, or at the very least following me on Twitch. You can do that in the usual way on Twitch. Follow me on YouTube. If you just put /Adam Ralph on most of these streams, or on YouTube or on patreon.com, you will find my pages, Twitter. Follow me. That would be great. And join my mailing list by going to chessengland.com, and right at the top you will find an opt-in button where you can join my mailing list. And tomorrow I will be sending out an email with discounts for anyone on my mailing list or anyone who plays in Hampstead at the weekend for these two websites, decodechess.com and chessable.com. And we'll see the owners of these two websites, the CEOs, on Saturday and Sunday at Hampstead, the 11th and 12th of August, where if you attend or you get my email, you'll get a discount code you can use to try out these excellent websites to improve your chess. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed this video. Like I say, if you have, subscribe. That would be really cool. Thank you ever so much for watching. See you again. My name's Adam Ralph, chessengland.com.